Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. So it's been a while since we've done one of these videos, and now obviously as the time's coming, we're coming to the end of this year, it's time to do this video. This is the BMW N52 reliability video of 2025.
What? Goddamn, get it done, will ya? Woo. When the blow up now, everybody's so unusual with it. Shit. But said times in his rhymes, cause his memories. We running through New York, so you.
So, as many of you guys can see here, this is the BMW N52 engine. Now, many of you will already know I own two of these, and I've owned quite a lot of these in my time since doing YouTube and even before YouTube. And obviously, there is a lot of things that, as the years are getting on, people are picking these up. And you're seeing majority of these cars with the N52 engine now over 100K, some of them on 150, some of them on 130,000 miles. You'll be very hard pushed to find one on very, very low mileage, and the lowest you'll probably find it on is around 80K, which is coming to that all maintenance mileage, which is 100K on these anyway. As many of you guys know, I purchased this BMW E64, which is the 6 Series convertible, 630i, which we get in the UK. This is something you don't get in the US. You get the 650i and a 645 Ci over there, but here we get the 630i as well. Now, this has been a joy to work on, and when I mean a joy, I mean everything's been very, very easy. If many of you guys remember from my E63 video, because of how much space is in the front here between the engine and obviously the radiator fan, you don't have to remove the radiator fan to be able to do any jobs that you want to do like you would on the E60 and the E90s. There is just so much space on the E64 and the E63, and this is one of the reasons why I love the 6 Series, because everything's so easy to get to. Now, that being said, the reason I'm stating that is because due to the reliability concerns of this engine, a lot of people seem to think you can just go out and buy this car and you're just going to be able to drive it. That's simply not the case, and this was the perfect example of that. When I bought it, obviously, when you buy these cars, you buy it from owners who don't know much about them. They just buy the car because they like the look of it and always wanted one. They have no understanding of the mechanical issues these cars have. Obviously, when I bought it, it had a very, very bad oil cooler leak and an oil filter housing leak, which was really bad, to the point it had thrown the oil all over the belts. And I would say it had been leaking for a good 2 years, probably before that owner bought it, the previous owner. No garage picked it up, and you'd be surprised considering it's got full history. This had only just been serviced to the point all the filters are brand new. Spark plugs had never been changed. It's something I had to do as well, but we'll get onto that in a minute. But this going into a garage, nobody picked up on it. They had oil all around the belts, which is what you would expect, purely because as it leaks down here, it will leak onto the belts, and then the belt is going to throw the oil everywhere. It crumbled all the plastic here on the coolant hose itself, so that was all brittle and crumbled. It also had thrown oil all over the engine, which I had to clean off. It had just completely destroyed the whole area. Now, someone who's not mechanically minded ain't gonna see it like that. You know, the guy was telling me it's a perfect car. He's been using it, this, that, the other. And obviously when I went to see the car, I explained to him this was bad. It's leaking and it's been like this for a long time. And obviously he took money off the car, which I'm not gonna sit here and say, you know, he was bagged. He would just maybe pay the full price, because he didn't. Because I showed him what was wrong with it. Also, we had another issue with the water pump, which I'll get into in a sec. But the main point that I'm making is, when you go and buy one of these, you really have to check these things on this car. And I would highly recommend to take a scan tool for other parts I'm going to be discussing. Obviously, the oil cooler and the oil filter housing, you will see the oil leaking down here, leaking all onto the belts. Everything just was destroyed. You had the lower oil cooler thermostat. That was all brittle as well, where oil had splashed on it, onto it, and the power steering hoses. It was just a complete mess. And like I said, that could have been like that before the owner actually bought it. But the fact is here, again, is that garages were servicing this car, and here is the oil filter right here. Any normal person, you know, garages always give these receipts saying they've done an inspection, check this, check that. And I do always question myself, what are they actually checking? Because if they checked this car properly, they would have seen oil down here and they could have told the owner it had a bad oil leak. Now, I'm not saying he wouldn't have fixed it, he probably would have if a garage had told him what was wrong with it. But then a lot of garages in the UK here charge so much for labour that they always tell customers, just get rid of the car. Sell it on because it's going to cost you a lot of money now. It needs this doing, needs that doing. So they just tell you palm the car off. Now, I'm quite fortunate that I can change the oil filter housing and the oil cooler in less than 10 minutes. Very simple job to do. I know this engine like the back of my hand, and that's even without removing the intake manifold. I don't have to do that. There is obviously easier ways of doing it as well. I've shown many of you guys and I've told you how you can get to it very simply. And I changed that. It was the first thing I'd done, and I cleaned up everywhere in the engine because I didn't want this engine covered in oil everywhere. It had gone everywhere, down to the sump, all around the belts. It was just covered everywhere. The next one on these when I got the car was when I took my scan tool, which I did tell a lot of you guys, was the water pump code. I had a water pump code where it was slowing down, which was a deviation code for the water pump not responding properly, which that can be very expensive for a lot of you guys if you was to go and buy one of these and the water pump's on its way out. As many of you guys know, these use an electronic water pump, and the water pump's located straight down here, and you have to work under the car. Now on the 6 Series, there is a lot of room to do that. This is not like your normal E60. This is not an XI. This is not like your E90s or your 1 Series. It is very, very, very simple to change it on the 6 Series. You can get both hands in there. You're able to move it around, pull it where you want it, place it properly, attach the coolant hoses back on properly. Everything's just so simple. But obviously when I scanned the code and knew it had that fault code, I didn't care because I already had, as many of you guys know from the previous videos, I did say to you I bought one for my E60 and it didn't need replacing. I already had one sitting on my bench. So when I got this, it wasn't a problem. When I saw the water pump code, I thought, that's fine. Now, if I didn't have that, I would have requested the last owner to drop more money off because I wouldn't have took this car because the water pumps on them are for like £400, as many of you guys know. I had it sitting there in a brand new thermostat. I fitted it. That's cleared the code. But again, the point I'm trying to make here is if you go to purchase one of these cars blind and you don't take a scan tool with you, this is where the cost is going to keep going and going and going. Now, I also took the chance to replace the coolant reservoir as well. Again, these cars over 100K, the float had broken off, which is common. And the same thing on my E60. They do break after being brittle for so many years. Now this is a whole new coolant reservoir. I replaced that. Now, obviously, as many of you guys are going to say, none of these parts are cheap. This is £50. You've got the water pump and thermostat, they're about £400. Oil cooler gaskets, they're about £12. Things start adding up very, very quickly, you know. And obviously, another thing I did while I was here, and luckily I did do it because I noticed it when I bought the car that I thought this was going to be shot, was this coolant flange here, which is the Mickey Mouse coolant flange. You can see I've replaced that. It's now got a Jubilee clip on it. That, as soon as I touched it, crumbled and broke off. I literally just pulled it on here and it literally just crumbled off. It was finished due to the heat. I think the oil leaking down here from the oil filter housing had destroyed it. It was just literally in bits. It was completely broken in pieces. That ain't expensive either. You can buy them for around a tenner and replace them, so it's not expensive. But it's the principle that if you're not willing to do the work on these yourself and you're going to pay someone, it is going to be very, very expensive. And you need to know that when you go and buy one of these, none of them are going to be perfect because a lot of them are owners who don't know or understand these cars fully. They just drive them, they insure them, fix them, service them, pay a garage to do everything. That's it. And a garage is not going to do everything that needs doing, only what the customer said to do or what they found. Most garages are not experienced with this engine, so therefore, when you take it to a garage, they're not looking at the things that need to be looked at. They're only looking at what they find wrong with it or when they plug it up to a scanner. Garages are not clued up with these cars the way they should be. And the reason I tell you to take a scan tool as well is because, as many of you guys know, Well, some of you won't know, this is the B30. So this engine has two disvalves, one here and one down here at the back of the manifold. Now, the only way you can actually see if they're working is by testing them with a scan tool to hear if they open and close, which is something I done. Other people will not do that, and obviously you won't know if they're working without a scan tool. What will end up happening is when you plug the scanner up to the car, you'll get an air mass code, or you'll get a stumbling idle around 1500 RPM and 1000, where it's trying to idle out, it will start stumbling everywhere. And that's purely because the disvalve is not closing, because it's stuck. If they don't close properly, they will cause an air leak in the manifold itself, which then the DME will pick that up and then make the car run absolute like crap. That is why I'm saying majority of these things are all electronic. A scan tool is your best friend when going to buy one of these cars. The Launch Creator Elite for BMW is one of the best scan tools I recommend. It's cheap enough, and if you can afford to buy one of these cars, then you can afford to buy the Launch Creator Elite, which is only £150. Amazon always do vouchers with it off for like £16, £6, so you can get it cheaper. It is well worth the money when going to purchase any BMW with any engine, so it shows you what is wrong with it. They are BMW specific scan tools. They pick up the actual fault codes. Even if you're a newbie, anyone can operate it. It's very simple, but obviously it's worth having. Obviously it's not going to show you everything. Sometimes you have to use your eyes and common sense and videos to show you what to look for. Because like I said, for instance, the oil coolant and oil filter housing is not going to pick up on a scan tool an oil leak down here. That's something you need to be aware of and be looking at. You need to be looking at coolant leaks, looking at certain things, you know, using common sense that is not going to be picked up on a scan tool. Luckily, these 6 Series have an oil pressure gauge on them, so I could tell straight away something wasn't right because the oil pressure wasn't sitting where it was meant to be. And that was due to the leak, because obviously you've got your oil pressure sensor right here. Obviously, all cars have them, even E60, even their E90s, but they don't have the oil pressure gauge like the 6 Series do. So I knew straight away this wasn't running correctly. You do have your other problems, like the solenoids. They can go bad and you will end up with a code for them. And this is why I'm saying to you, scan tool is very crucial when going to buy this car, because these are not cheap. They work out about 120 quid each, even directly from BMW. And if these fail, these will cause you to lack a lot of low down power, higher end power. The car will be bogging down on power. You'll have your RPM stumbling and the car will run very, very rough. They are a main cause of why a lot of people do get rid of these cars. Bear in mind, I've seen a lot of cars, especially 6 Series, because it's a lot of old guys that end up owning these, and people who are not clued up with cars end up selling them. Then they plug up the cheapest scan tool they can find, and I do not recommend a cheap scan tool because that's going to throw you off, because a code for the solenoids will give you a code for a camshaft sensor, and that is where people go wrong. And this is the pinnacle of this, what I'm about to tell you. There was a guy selling a 6 Series actually on eBay, very cheap. I think it was for about 1,500 quid, purely because it had a code for a solenoid. He didn't know what was wrong with it. His cheap scanner told him camshaft correlation. He replaced the camshaft sensor. It didn't do nothing. So he listed it as spares and repairs. And bear in mind, the car was on 160K. It had a problem with the solenoids, and he wasn't aware of that. So he ended up giving a car away for cheap just because of a £100 part right there that he couldn't solve because he was using the wrong scan tool. And this is very, very common. And I've seen many cars, E60s even, come up with that same thing where traders have took them in, dealers, they don't know what the fault code is. They're running their head around rings. Garages don't know what it is because everyone overlooks these two right here. And they start replacing camshaft sensors, which are not the problem of the car. But this is what happens with the wrong diagnostic equipment. That's what I'm telling you. The Launch Creator Elite for BMW is the perfect choice when going to purchase any BMW, regardless of this engine. It doesn't run out of a license. Once you've paid for it, that is it. You don't have to keep upgrading it every year. That is it. It works fully. You can plug it up to any car. it will work and it will let you do everything the same. There is no other thing on top of it. Like I said, there is a lot to go wrong on these engines. You've also got to bear in mind, you've got your valve cover, which sits underneath here. You've also got your eccentric shaft sensor. You know, when you pull the valve cover off, you've got your Valvetronic seal, you've got your eccentric shaft seal, you've got loads of different seals. You've also got to replace the bolts on these because they're magnesium valve covers, so the bolts are torque to yield, so you will have to replace the bolts on the valve cover. The ignition coils can go out and can go bad. Luckily for me, I've got so many in this garage from other cars and spares, I can just change them out. But for many of you guys, again, it's not something you'd be able to just change because you won't have the parts there, so you have to go and buy them, and it can work out very expensive. £30 per ignition coil, and I usually replace all 6. You know, that's another thing many of you guys have to be aware of. If you're going to purchase one of these, you've also got your CCV, which the manifold has to come off for that. They're going to break, especially if you have to remove the valve cover. They're going to be brittle. It's never going to have been touched. So do factor in, you're going to have to change that. That's £150 alone for the whole CCV kit. And it is well worth replacing it because it's all going to be brittle. It's going to break. Every single hose will break. Just replace it and get it done so you don't have to worry about that again. You've also got your starter motors on them. They like to go out, and they are known to go out. They've even gone out on me when I suspected it. One went out on my E60 when I was, you know, luckily only 10 minutes away from home. And luckily my friend recovered me, but so that wasn't a problem. So I know they go out. So that's one thing I am going to be doing on this, purely because they do get tired. Starter motors don't last forever. They need to be replaced. Otherwise that will leave you stranded when you least expect it. Take my word on that. They will leave you stranded. Another thing on these is the sump gaskets like to leak. When you first go up to probably change your own oil, or if you take it to a garage and they say it's leaking, that is an easy fix. I've told many people before, I even done it on this one because it was so easy on the 6 Series. Disconnect the sump pan bolts. It's very simple. You can put either Loctite 5900 or any kind of gasket sealer around the sump. You can take away the sump gasket. It's very easy to pull out because it becomes very brittle and hard. So you can pull it out from the sump, seal it all up, which you can get the sealer around there with the thin tube. Very, very simple because I've done it. Seal the whole sump the whole way around and then bolt it back up. That is your best way of doing it. You don't have to use a gasket. I know many of you are going to sit here and tell me that's what BMW recommends, but that is incorrect. That's why they always leak. I did it on my E60. I've now done it on this, and I've not had one leak completely. And I use gasket sealer because I didn't know about Loctite 5900 until Porsche. I use Loctite 5900 on this, and it is completely sealed the sump. Dodge use the exact same thing on their transmission pans and also the oil pans. They use a gasket sealer, and that's why they don't end up with no leaks, purely because they use gasket sealer and not gaskets. That I'd strongly recommend to do that. Obviously, the only one you don't want to do that on is on the valve cover due because of how hot they get. You need to use the proper gasket for these magnesium ones because thin metal one that protects between obviously the valve cover and the heads, purely because obviously it will damage the heads obviously if you try and use any kind of gasket sealer. So do not think you can get out of that. I strongly recommend to replace the valve cover with a valve cover gasket and new bolts. Do not try and reuse your old bolts for that because they will snap. Like I said, guys, overall this is a reliable car if you maintain it correctly. The next thing I'm going to be telling all of you, if you buy any BMW, it doesn't matter about M52, M54, M53, M57, all of them, oil changes. Make damn sure to change your oil every 5,000 miles, and do make sure to use 5W40 oil. If you use 5W30, you will notice your oil consumption being very, very high, and you end up seeing yourself where you're burning oil. These cars run at extremely high temperature, which that oil can't accommodate. You've got to remember the 30 in the oil is the temperature it can withstand from the engine temperature. These engines get extremely hot, hence why they don't put a temp gauge on the dash, purely because many people will panic, and cars are designed to run hot. Even on my Porsche, I've got an oil temp gauge, and that goes up to 100, 110, Celsius. If many of you guys had seen that, you would panic. I don't panic because I know that's perfectly normal. If you're using a heavier weight oil, as many of you guys know, the oil will get hotter due to it being a thicker oil in the engine. These engines run very, very hot, and you've got to think, if you're out in the heat as well, with these engines, the amount of heat from the road coming up, your oil consumption is going to go down majorly. That's another thing that was happening on this car when this was being serviced. Garages were using the wrong oil, 5W30. And when I got in it, what did I see? The guy said he had just serviced it 1,000 miles ago. Oil consumption was completely low. And I told him that's to be expected because they'd used the wrong oil. 5W30 is a complete no. Make sure you use the Shell 5W40. That is the one I highly recommend. You guys see I use it all the time. I had no issues. My consumption, E60, and all my cars I've used it on have always been fine. Change over and you'll see the difference on your car, especially if you're burning oil. But overall, guys, these cars are super, super reliable if maintained correctly. Check all your fluids, your power steering fluid, which is CHF fluid, all your oil. Make sure you check everything correctly. Make sure you're always checking for a long drive that you don't have no oil leaks, no problems arising, because a lot of people don't open their bonnet, don't check what's happening with their car, and then they just go on a long drive, and then the car breaks down and they blame the car. It's not the car, it's the owner. Learn to lift your bonnet up and check these things. Look all around the engine. If you know you've got a long drive planned and you're going in that car, make sure if you're not comfortable with something that hasn't been done yet, do it before you go. That's what I would do. Like now I've done the water pump, the last thing I've got to do is the valve cover gasket, PCV, and the starter motor. If I was to take this on a long drive, those were the things I will do, because they're the last things I've got to do to complete this engine to make sure it's fully reliable. Yes, driving it locally is all fine, but if I was to go on a long drive, if you know it's not leaking, I wouldn't take the chance, purely because I know it will leak. I know how these cars are, and I know it's going to happen, and I'm not going to take that chance. So there you have it, guys. Overall, this engine is a very, very solid engine in the right capable hands. Now, I'm not saying mechanics ain't good at what to do, because there are some mechanics that do understand these cars, but the majority of them do not understand these cars, and they falsely diagnose them, make you spend money which doesn't fix the issue, i.e. the solenoids, and i.e. like the oil cooler and the oil filter housing gasket. A lot of garages will repair just the one and not the other, because they think it's just the one and the oil leak persists. So then you go back there again, replacing them again and again. I've seen that before on my M55 when they told me it was replaced and it wasn't, and then I had to change it because it was leaking badly. Garages will be your worst enemy, and any backstreet garage is going to be your worst enemy with these engines. If you want the car to survive and last, I strongly recommend do the maintenance yourself. There is enough videos online to guide you on how to repair these engines, and so much information out there. My channel's got a lot of useful information, and so has a lot of other people. Use it to your advantage to fix your own car and master this engine, because it's very easy. And when you realize how easy it is, you'll realize yourself you are paying these garages like a fool, and just basically burning your money when you could have done it yourself. So that's all there is, guys. This is the BMW N52 reliability video of 2025. And as I said, this is a superb engine, and providing you look after it and do all the maintenance, and if you're ready for it, this car will go on for a very, very long time. Thank you very much for watching, guys. It's BMW Dr. Dean here, and goodbye.